Good day, buddies. I'm sure lots of ant folks around the world have young pet ant colonies now from the past nuptial flights, like your buddy here. So, for today's video we will make a cheap setup that everyone can do for their lovely young ant colonies to live. Before we begin, allow me to appreciate the most awesome guys on our channel. Jeffrey Miles, Sean, M Pro Gamer, The Hunter Chick, and Commander Falks. Thank you so much for being a member, and supporting the channel's future project, and making every episodes possible. Let me also say welcome back, buddies. And for those new to the channel, you're also welcome to D-Colony. The ant homes we're making today is like this ant nest here. An ant farm they typically used in labs, to raise and observe colonies. We'll be making two types of petri dish nest. The classic one, and my own D-Colony version of the nest, which I made improvements through the years of using them. And based on my experience we'll also discuss the pros and cons of the classic one, compared to our own version. For this project we'll be using this tiny containers. I'll put the links on the description. These containers are the perfect size for the D-Colony version. But let me show you how to make the classic one first, and for this one if you could find a deeper container the better, as it requires more space for the base. We'll need to drill at least 3 holes on the sides, 2 of it for hydration, and 1 for entrance. Consider drilling 4 holes if you want an extra for expansion. I'm using step drill bit, but you can use any boring tool. Just make sure the hole size will be able to fit the tubings you plan to use. For the classic one, which most keepers use a tubing to create a space for hydration below like this. We can't use this method here as our petri dish lacks depth, and we don't have a smaller sized tubing as well. So, I'll show you how to make the classic one, without a tubing in the middle. Anyway, we'll need 2 elbow connectors for the hydration. We'll just install them to the holes facing each other. Then lay a base layer of plaster. Yes buddies, the classic design uses plaster of Paris, which is so good in absorbing moisture, which is a great feature for an ant nest. Just be careful as it dries so fast. If you want to delay the hardening process, you can use cold water in preparing the mixture, and it will give you more time to work on it. Next step is we'll just connect this to using moist sand. This way we can control the size of the hydration path. Then to finish the build we'll just completely cover it with plaster. On top of this layer is where will the ants rest and nest. You can make a flat surface, or make humps and bumps like this. We'll sprinkle dry sand on top, so we can have some rough surface. It'll also make the texture more natural, and just like that the classic version is done. Plaster dries so fast so we just take around 15 minutes to finish a classic petri dish nest. I'll show you how this works later, pros, cons, and we'll compare it to the D-Colony version, which we are going to build next. On my version I also make at least 3 holes on the sides. None of this is for hydration, but 2 for expansion, and 1 for entrance. I encountered problems using the classic one before. The main reason why I came up with my own version by trying to solve those problems. On this design we'll only need a patch of plaster, which will act like a solid sponge as it's here to suck and hold moisture. For the next step we're gonna use this DIY guide or mold. We made it the similar way on how we did the guide we use on this vid. Of course the design is up to us, we can make it with more curves and chambers like this. But since I'm designing a petri nest back then, I did go for one big chamber like in the usual petri dish ant farm. It's beneficial to make a guide like this, especially if you plan to make lots of this nest like me, as it will allow you to make them look more similar, and faster. We'll just fit it inside, then fill the holes with moist sand. Just compact them like this. If you plan to make only a few, then you can just construct the sand manually like we do on most of our projects. We'll just lift the guide little by little, while gently pushing the sand down. And there we have the nesting and hydration chamber quick. Next step is filling it with sanded grout, until it reaches the level of entrance and expansion holes. Then just block it with the right size of tubing. I plug the tubing with a moist tissue paper. Then we'll just continue filling it with grout up to the brim. Put the cover tightly. Flip it over. Then use vibration by tapping the container to send most of the grout to the top and eliminate air pockets. We'll position it like this for 48 hours while drying. We can also put weights on top of it to make sure the lid below won't move and leak. We can now remove the lid and all the sand inside so we can move to the next step. And here's how it looks after we brushed off all the remaining sand under a running water. We got them nice deep chambers. Anyway, the next step is setting the flooring. This is what's good on this method, as we can use another color for the base as they're done separately. And for this we're using a white color, sanded grout. I actually mix a little bit of brown here so the color won't be as white as the ants' eggs. Don't forget to plug the holes. Another good thing here is you can make the chambers deep or shallow easily, just by adjusting the thickness of the base. Just make sure to cover the patch of plaster below completely, for a more durable flooring. Let's top it with dry sand for a nicer texture. We also made white versions here using the same process. And yes buddies, you guessed it right. We use orange color for the flooring. We already brushed the excess sand out, and there we have the nice rough bases. No need to install sponge here, as the plaster below will act as one. And with around 15 mm chamber depth, we can house most ant species here. For high humidity and moisture-loving ant species, we should block the expansion holes with silicone plugs or anything that would block and retain moisture inside. For dry-loving ants, we can use our DIY vent tubes or cotton to lower the humidity inside the nest. We'll now put the cover back, lining up the drilled hole for the hydration of course. I installed 4 mm drinking straw and blocked it with a silicone plug that we can easily unplug when it's time to water the nest. Now it's time to compare the two. First let me tell you what I like with the classic version. First is it's so easy to make. Second is it has great visibility for observation. Third and last is the nest absorbs and retains moisture really well. Anyway, this nest can be hydrated on any of these connectors. One will just serve as breather for the water to flow and to be absorbed easier. Others fixed these connectors on the container using hot glue to avoid leaks. We didn't do that as we already use an oversized tubing to make it really tight, so there's no need for glue. As we can see, this one's already moist in a few minutes. Now for what I dislike, or the cons of the setup that I tried to improve on our version. On the classic one we cannot cover it from light just from the top, as light passes through the sides as well. That's the reason we made a grout wall around the D-Colony version, so we can just cover it from top easily with almost anything. And the darkness needed by the colony to relax is provided. Another benefit from this walls is it makes the tubing to fit more tightly, even if we did a sloppy job on drilling the container. Tight enough to block the smallest invading ants. Next one is the plaster itself isn't so durable, especially in moist humid environment like an ant nest. On my experience, lots of ant species can easily dig through it. When that happens they'll nest inside the plaster flooring, creating a blind spot. Sooner or later, they'll eventually reach the hydration line below, which will let them escape through this watering ports, and yes buddies, they can get out from here. So, in our version we covered the plaster with grout. As it's much tougher compared to plaster, most ants won't even attempt to dig through it except for Trichomemex destructor, and Solenopsis. On the classic one, even if the colony didn't attempt to dig at all, the plaster itself deteriorates in a few months cause of the moisture, so ants would likely encourage you to dig on that situation. Don't get me wrong buddies, the classic petri dish nest is good for young colonies. You just need to be careful, and make sure to move them when the time comes to avoid escapees. The classic design like this will last for only several months for an active ant colony, while our grout version will last for years and years, wash and reused cycle like on typical test tube setups. I hope you enjoyed our build today, as I really do enjoy making and sharing them with you buddies. Let me know what do you think about them in the comments. I just hope you have learned something from this video guys. Be a genie for the first time, by granting my wish and tapping the like and share button, that would help a lot. This is D-Colony, saying goodbye for now, but hoping to see you on my next videos.